All right, well, this is just a short lecture. I just want to share with everyone a little bit about our reading for this week, or for our first reading. And of course, our first essay is going to be based on that reading. So it's important to have some kind of understanding of that reading. Again, it's not a literature class, but we're just using the short stories that we're going to be looking at as kind of a springboard into the essay topics, because they all have to do with the way people kind of relate to each other, or maybe don't really relate to each other all that well in the case of literature, because there's usually some conflict. But let's get started and talk a little bit about our first story. And this is going to be brief. This should just be about 10 minutes, I think, or less. And it's the story Hills Like White Elephants, which is written by Ernest Hemingway, who is a famous American writer. And by the way, we're also going to be doing, as we go through, not only this reading is not only important for the essay, but also summarizing. So I do have some summary questions that we'll talk about in a minute related to this. But Ernest Hemingway was raised in Oak Park, Illinois, just a little bit north of the college, where Morton College is located in Cicero, and died in 1961, relatively young. But in his fairly short life, he became one of the most influential American writers of the 20th century. And in many ways, is the way he defined himself personally, and maybe in his writing as well, was contrasting the values of his quote unquote Caucasian church-going family and community. So Oak Park at that time was probably a very different place than it is today, like most places, but it was fairly far suburban at that time for Chicago, and was very conservative. Compared to, I think today it's probably much more progressive than it was at that time. Of course, maybe the whole country was. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a political scientist, but at any rate, he was quoted as saying Oak Park was a place where there were wide lawns and narrow minds. That's never really been verified whether he actually said those exact words or not. But at any rate, he had some sort of, I think, conflict with his family and with the community he grew up in, and he was kind of in some ways rebelling against that in the way his writing changed. But anyway, that's just a little bit about Hemingway. And one of the things that will be important that I want you to look for, though, as you're reading this short story, again, not a literature class, but it's something we look at to try to understand good writing, is what many people have called Hemingway's iceberg theory or iceberg method. In other words, if you think of an iceberg, there's a lot under the surface, right, that we don't know. Sometimes you describe a person like that, like they're very unemotional, but then, wow, you start talking to them and they have all this stuff churning, going on under the surface. And that's a little bit how Hemingway's writing is. You're going to read this and you might think, it's kind of flat. It doesn't use any special vocabulary. It's not flowery or ornate, like this really decorative kind of style of writing. But yet, if you read it carefully, you'll start to, I think, notice that there's something going on here. Maybe I'm not getting it. And that's the way I often feel when I read Hemingway's short stories the first time. It's kind of like something's happening under the surface, like the iceberg, right? There's all this stuff going on, but Hemingway's not going to really tell you. And so in some ways, I think the joy maybe of reading some of his stories is you have to kind of figure it out, almost like a bit of a puzzle. And that's what we'll be doing with this first short story. Now, the other thing he's often known for is what people would say he just has beautiful prose. People who like his writing. Now, his personal life, disturbingly public life is the phrase I put up here. And much of his life he was abroad, living in different countries and traveling. And the story we'll read, you'll see, is set in not in the United States. So we'll look for that when we talk about setting. I wanted to talk first, since we're going to be reading a few short stories, just how we can read the short stories more profitably so you get something out of them, a little more out of them, and you're able to use it for your writing. And that's our main goal, is to understand the story well enough so you can use it as a springboard, like I said, into the topics that we'll be writing our essays about. So one of the first things you might look at is character, who's in the story. You're going to look at the setting, and I'm going to go over each one of these just briefly in just a moment, and you'll think about the language used to construct the story. It's written language. So what is that language like? The point of view, in other words, how are you entering the story? Whose eyes are you seeing through, so to speak? And we'll talk about what that means in just a moment. And then finally, are there any themes that you think are important, that are noticeable? And we'll talk about that as well. So let's look at each one of these in turn, and then I'll leave it for you to go ahead and read the story, start thinking about it. Hopefully this week you can take a look at the story, but definitely by next week, because we're going to have that first essay due at the end of the second week. So The sooner the better, and it is a pretty short read, so you may even end up reading through this twice. I always think that can be helpful for a short story like this. Here is a section, the very first page of the story, and let me just read a little bit of this for you to get us into this. It says, "The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. On this side there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between two lines of rails in the sun. Close against the side of the station there was the warm shadow of the building and a curtain, made of strings of bamboo beads, hung across the open door into the bar to keep out flies. The American and the girl with him sat at a table in the shade outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went on to Madrid." "What should we drink?" the girl asked. She'd taken off her hat and put it on the table. "It's pretty hot," the man said. "Let's drink beer." "Dos cervezas," the man said into the curtain. "Big ones?" a woman asked from the doorway. "Yes, 2 big ones." Okay, so that's it. So there's a lot going on, but it's, not action, but it's setting things up. And that's the first paragraph of the story. And we're going to talk about that in terms of all those categories I mentioned just a moment ago. So characters. Who are the characters? Well, if you go back, these are really the only characters we're going to see throughout the whole story. It says right here, as we read down, the American and the girl. So all we know is there's an American, and it does say he, I think, so we can assume he's male. So we have an American, male, and we have a girl. Now, it doesn't say that she's American, so maybe she's from the country. Now, where are they? Well, it mentions Madrid, which is in Spain, Barcelona, which is in Spain. So we know that this train, it's hot, and they're waiting, and they're having a cold beer, the man and the girl. So the American and the girl. So here we have our 2 characters. There's also, it looks like a waitress maybe. A woman asked from the doorway, so, bringing the beer for them. So we know that, but she's not really an important character. So we get our 2 characters set up here in a very short paragraph, and that's what we have: the American and the girl. And again, we don't know if the girl's American. Maybe she's British. Maybe she's from Spain. Maybe she's European. Maybe she's from somewhere else. We don't know that, and we won't find that out, I don't think. So where and when is the story taking place? I think even from this first paragraph, he doesn't say it was a time in Spain. He doesn't write like that, right? He just mentions Barcelona, and he writes Madrid, and he talks about a train station, and they're having a beer. They're obviously at a cafe or a little bar near the train station, right? He does mention the Ebro, which is a river, which I think if we looked up on Google, in terms of Google Maps or something, we could find an Ebro must be a river that runs through Spain, and I honestly can't tell you that because I haven't been to Spain. But we could look that up. And there's also, does it say anything else about setting? I think that's about it. They're at the station, right? So the train station, we have the Ebro, the hills across the valley. Looking at these hills, those are going to become important as a metaphor in the story. And so that, again, that's sort of setting up this story. A lot going on, like I said, but it doesn't seem like anything in particular. It just seems like very normal language. But so far, we can figure out the American, the girl. We can also figure out that they're at a train station, that they're somewhere between Madrid and Barcelona. Is that right? Madrid and Barcelona, and 2 cities in Spain, and waiting for that train, having a beer. So where and when? Another when is, well, it's hot, so we can probably guess it's summer or spring, maybe. But we don't know what time period they're in. Now, Hemingway's life, if it was just a modern time, we got his dates, so we could kind of guess maybe it's sometime during his lifetime, because it doesn't seem to be like a historical period. It's not ancient, times or something like that, and it's not a futuristic thing, we don't think. So it's probably just a modern time, like the 20s or 30s for the setting. So there's our setting. Another question we can ask is language. One of the things I like to think about with language especially, is it literal or figurative? In other words, writers tend to shift back and forth when they're writing fiction, but also in academic writing, between what we call concrete and abstract concepts. So concrete might be something, I mentioned literal or figurative, but also concrete or abstract. Concrete might be something like the Braeburn apple I had for breakfast. That's a very specific type of apple. Braeburn apple would be a little less specific. Apple, fruit, produce. Produce would be, I had some produce for breakfast. That just sounds kind of not very descriptive, right? So think about how concrete, how specific this is, or how abstract it might be. Also literal or figurative, and that's where we use things like metaphors and similes and things like it was like a rose. It was these kind of So we have on the one hand literal language, which is just saying what I'm saying, which I think if we go back and look at this, the hills across the valley of the Eber were long and white. That's very concrete, right? We have these hills, we have this specific river, um, the station, there was a warm shadow, a curtain made of string. So it's very descriptive and it's very specific. We have Barcelona, we have Madrid, these and with the train stations. So I think I don't see much figurative language yet. This is all seems very literal, and it all seems very kind of concrete and descriptive. So we have language. We can look at that. That's something we can look at in a short story. Another thing we can look at is the point of view. And point of view is most commonly either first person or third person. That means either the story has pronouns like I did this, I went here, I went to the station, I was in Barcelona, or it's going to be saying he was in Barcelona, she was in Barcelona, they were waiting for the train. That's third person. Once in a while, you have a short story that's written in third person. It's a little strange, and it's kind of like an experimental thing. Some writers do it, but they say you go to the station, you have a beer, you talk to your boyfriend. These are things in second person. So if we go back and look at this story again, we can see the hills across the valley on this side. We skim down. The American and the girl. It doesn't say me. It says he or she, right? So we're in third person here. We're reading about somebody else. It's through the eyes of a narrator, but we're not really seeing who that narrator is. It's just somebody's telling us about this man and this girl, man and woman. So that's our point of view. We're in third person. So that's important to know because it can change the way the story's set up. If it's first person, it could be very different again. And definitely second person is strange to read because it's this, you did this, and it's almost like they're putting ideas in your head. Finally, the last thing I wanted to mention about the story is, are there any universal themes in the story? Ideas most people can relate to. So these might be things like love, family, tolerance, friendship, conflict, heroism, honesty, making decisions, deception, growing up, all these things. So I think you'll have to read the story probably to find this. Probably from this first paragraph, we're not going to be able to say, oh yeah, there's this clear theme of, family or something here. No, but I think as you read the story, you might see, and that's something really you want to pay attention to because writers are usually trying to say something, good fiction writers like Hemingway, and he's probably got something in mind. And so there's a theme here somewhere. And it's a short story, so it moves along pretty quickly, although, again, it may seem like not a lot is happening because of that iceberg thing. There's something going on. That's what I really want you to look for the theme. What is this couple trying to decide? Because they are a couple, they're together, and they're trying to make an important decision that's going to affect both of their lives and someone else's life too, I think. So think about that as you read through the story. And again, this story is Hills Like White Elephants, and for our reading summary, I'll have this posted in Blackboard, a file, but each week I'll post for the reading that we do each week, I'll post a set of questions. And these are just things to think about. You can summarize it however you want to, but and you don't have to do a lot, but that's why I put the questions. If you answered these 3 questions, you'd probably be writing enough of a summary for our class. Just brief, a paragraph or so, to try to get the main ideas of the story down on paper. All right, well that is again, an overview of Hills Like White Elephants, what I'd like you to look at, this short story by Ernest Hemingway for our first week. And let me know, as always, if you have any questions. And the reading should be posted as well, just near the link to this video.